I never thought the day would come when my own son would look at me like a stranger, or worse, like a burden. My name is Margaret. I am 72 years old, and until last year, I believed that love, patience, and sacrifice always came back to you in the end. I believed that if you gave your whole life to your children, they would never turn their backs on you. I was wrong. My husband, Thomas, and I built our home with our own hands, brick by brick, nail by nail. We moved into that house when we were newly married, young and hopeful. I planted roses in the front yard. Thomas built the porch swing. That house didn't just hold walls and furniture. It held birthdays, scraped knees, late-night prayers, and laughter that echoed down the hallway. That house raised our son. We named him Daniel. He was our miracle baby. When he took his first steps in that living room, Thomas cried. When Daniel caught the school bus for the first time, I stood at the window until it disappeared, my heart pounding with pride and fear. Every sacrifice we made was for him. Missed vacations, extra shifts, quiet dinners because we were too tired to talk. We never complained. When Daniel told us he was getting married, I was happy, truly happy. I baked cookies the night before he introduced us to his fiancée, trying to calm my nerves. I wanted her to feel welcome. I wanted her to feel loved. Her name was Claire. She smiled, but her eyes never warmed. She looked around our house like she was inspecting something old, something in the way. She barely spoke to me. When she did, her words were polite, sharp, and quick, like she was checking a box. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was just an old woman afraid of change. But things started to shift. Daniel stopped sitting with us in the evenings. He stopped asking how his father's health was. Conversations became short, cold, rushed. Claire was always there, always listening, always correcting him when he spoke too softly to us. Then, one evening, Daniel asked us to sit down. His hands were shaking. He wouldn't look me in the eyes. "Mom, Dad, Claire and I talked," he said. That's when my heart began to sink. He told us they planned to move into the house after the wedding. I smiled at first. I thought he meant with us, together, like family. But then he cleared his throat. "She feels it would be better if you and Dad found another place to stay." I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He said the house felt too crowded, that Claire wanted a fresh start, that it was time for us to slow down and be somewhere with care. I remember gripping the edge of the table. I remember Thomas going silent, his shoulders drooping like someone had pulled the life out of him. I asked one question. "Daniel, this is our home." He finally looked at me then, and his eyes were empty. He said, "Mom, please don't make this hard." That night, I cried into my pillow so quietly that my husband wouldn't hear me. I cried for the boy I raised. I cried for the home we built. And I cried because deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I didn't know then that the real humiliation wasn't being asked to leave our home. It was what my own son would do to me on his wedding day, in front of everyone. We didn't leave our home that night. Not right away. For weeks, Thomas and I moved through the house like ghosts. We slept in the same bedroom we had shared for nearly 50 years, but it felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. Every sound reminded me that our time there was ending. The creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind brushing the curtains I had sewn myself. Daniel avoided us. When he did speak, it was short and stiff. He kept saying it was temporary, that we would be more comfortable somewhere else. Claire never spoke to us directly. She sent messages through Daniel, like we were tenants she wanted removed quietly. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone. "They're old," she said, not even lowering her voice. "They need supervision. It's not safe for them here." I stood in the hallway, my hand on the wall to keep from falling. Thomas had worked until his back gave out. I still cooked, cleaned, paid bills. We weren't helpless. We were just inconvenient. The day we packed our things was the hardest day of my life. I wrapped dishes in newspaper, my hands shaking so badly I broke one of my favorite plates, the blue one my mother gave me when I married Thomas. I didn't even cry when it shattered. I just stared at the pieces and thought, so this is how a lifetime ends. Daniel didn't help. Claire supervised. She stood by the door, arms crossed, reminding us what not to take. That stays. That's part of the house. She pointed to furniture we bought with our own savings. She told us to leave behind clutter. Our memories were clutter. By evening, we were driven to an assisted living home on the edge of town. The building smelled like disinfectant and loneliness. Thin walls, narrow beds, a shared dining room where no one looked at each other for too long. "This is just until the wedding," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "Then we'll see." I watched him walk away without looking back. That night, Thomas sat on the bed with his hands folded, staring at the floor. He whispered, "I failed you." I held his face in my hands and told him he didn't, but inside, something broke that never healed. Weeks passed. We attended meals, we smiled when spoken to, but every night I dreamed of our porch swing and woke up crying. Then came the invitation, not a phone call, not a visit, an envelope. It was elegant, thick paper, gold lettering, our names printed like an afterthought. No note, no warmth, just instructions. When I read the date, my chest tightened. My son's wedding, the happiest day of his life. I wanted to believe we still mattered. The morning of the wedding, I wore my best dress, the one Daniel bought me years ago, and said I looked beautiful. I pinned my hair the way I always did when he was a child, hoping he'd recognize me as his mother again. Thomas straightened his jacket, even though his hands were trembling. "We'll sit quietly," he said. "We won't cause trouble." I nodded. I had no idea that by the end of that day, my son would humiliate me in a way I could said nothing to defend myself from. And I had no idea that when I finally spoke, the room would go silent. I thought the worst pain was being forced out of my own home, until my son stood up at his wedding and ordered me to leave. The wedding hall was beautiful. Too beautiful for what was about to happen. White flowers covered the walls. Soft music filled the air. Guests laughed, hugged, took photos. Everyone looked happy. Everyone except me. I sat beside Thomas in the back row, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my heart pounding like it wanted to escape my chest. Daniel didn't look at us. Not once. Claire walked down the aisle, glowing, confident, victorious. When she reached Daniel, she smiled at him, the way someone smiles when they finally won something they worked very hard to get. The ceremony went on like we weren't there. No mention of parents, no thankful words, no loving glance in our direction. I told myself to stay calm. I told myself, this is his day. Don't ruin it. After the vows, everyone moved to the reception hall. Tables were covered with white cloths and candles. There was a seating chart near the entrance. I walked over slowly. I searched for our names. They weren't there. I checked again and again. My stomach dropped. Before I could say anything, Daniel approached us. His jaw was tight. Claire stood just behind him, her hand resting on his arm like a leash. "Mom, Dad," he said quietly, "there's been a change." I felt the room spin. "There's no place for you here," he continued. "Claire's family is uncomfortable. They think it's awkward." Awkward. 50 years of sacrifice reduced to that word. Thomas opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face turned pale. I could feel his arm shaking beside mine. I asked Daniel one question, my voice barely a whisper. "Are you asking us to leave?" He didn't answer right away. Claire did. "Yes," she said, softly but firmly. "This is our moment." People were starting to notice. Heads turned, conversations slowed. I could feel eyes on us, curious, judgmental, confused. Daniel finally nodded. "Please don't make a scene. You can go back to the home. We'll talk later." Something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. It cracked quietly, the way a heart does when it realizes there's nothing left to hope for. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but I stood anyway. I smoothed my dress. I looked around the room, at strangers who would never know what this cost me. Then I looked at my son, and for the first time that day, I spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "I won't make a scene, but I won't pretend either." The room went quiet. Claire stiffened. Daniel's eyes widened. I took a breath. "I carried you for 9 months. I fed you, clothed you, stayed awake through fevers and fear. Your father and I gave you everything we had, including the home you now live in." You could hear a pin drop. I never asked for repayment, but I never imagined being erased. My hands were shaking now, but my voice stayed steady. "So, I will leave, not because I'm ashamed, but because someday you'll remember this moment, and when you do, I hope it hurts." I turned to Thomas and took his hand. We walked out together. No applause, no comfort, just silence. Behind us, the doors closed, and with them, the last piece of my family. I thought walking out of that wedding was the end of my story, but what happened afterwards changed everything and revealed the truth I never expected.
The ride back to the assisted living home was quiet, too quiet. Thomas stared out the window, his reflection faint against the glass. I watched the streetlights pass by, each one reminding me how far away our old life felt. Neither of us spoke. There were no words left that could make sense of what had happened. When we reached our room, Thomas sat down slowly, like his body had aged 10 years in one evening. He loosened his tie with trembling fingers. "I shouldn't have let this happen," he said. I knelt in front of him and held his hands. They were cold. "We loved him," I whispered. "That was never wrong." But love, I was learning, doesn't always protect you. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed Daniel's face again and again, not angry, not cruel, just empty, as if I were already gone from his life, erased like an old photograph thrown away. The next morning, no call came, no message, no apology. Days passed. People at the home asked how the wedding went. I smiled politely and said, "It was nice." That was easier than explaining how your own child can break you without raising his voice. Thomas grew quieter. He stopped attending group activities. He stopped reading the newspaper. He spent hours sitting by the window, watching birds land on the fence and fly away again. One afternoon, he collapsed in the hallway. The doctor said it was exhaustion, stress, a heart weakened by grief. As I sat beside his bed that night, holding his hand, I felt a fear deeper than anything before. I realized something terrible. Daniel hadn't just taken our home. He had taken our sense of belonging. And without that, my husband was fading. I called Daniel from the nurse's station. It rang and rang. No answer. I left a voicemail. My voice shook, but I stayed calm. "Your father is unwell," I said. "Please call me." He didn't. Claire did. Her message was short. "We're on our honeymoon. This isn't the time." I stared at the phone for a long time after that. Something hardened inside me, not anger, but clarity. I finally understood that my son had chosen his life, and in that choice there was no room left for us. A week later, Thomas was discharged. He walked slower, slept more, smiled less, and still no word from Daniel. Until one afternoon, a letter arrived, not handwritten, typed. Inside was a single page. It said they were selling the house, our house. They wanted us to sign papers to make it official. My hand shook as I read the words. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just neglect. It was erasure. And for the first time since the wedding, I cried openly, not from sadness alone, but from the deep, aching understanding that my life had been rewritten without my consent. I thought losing our home was the deepest betrayal, until I discovered what my son planned to do next and how far he was willing to go to forget us. I didn't sign the papers, not right away. I held them in my hands for days, reading the words over and over as if they might change if I stared long enough. Legal language, cold language, words that turned a lifetime into property and signatures. Thomas watched me from his chair. "Do what you think is right," he said softly. "I'm tired." That sentence scared me more than anything else. We had nowhere to go. The assisted living home was expensive. Our savings were shrinking. Every dollar we spent felt like another reminder that the future we planned no longer existed. One evening, I walked outside alone. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds. I sat on a bench and thought about the woman I used to be, strong, hopeful, certain that family meant safety. I wondered when I became disposable. Weeks passed before Daniel finally called. His voice was distant, polite, almost professional. "Mom," he said, "we need to move forward. Claire is pregnant." I froze. A grandchild, a word that should have filled me with joy, but instead filled me with grief. "That's wonderful," I said quietly. There was a pause. "Look," he continued, "we can't support two households. We need closure. Please sign." Closure, as if love had an expiration date. I asked him one question. "Do you remember the porch swing?" He sighed. "Mom, that's not relevant." I closed my eyes. I pushed you on that swing every evening. You used to fall asleep there. You said it made you feel safe. Silence. I hope you find that feeling again, I said, because one day, when your child looks at you the way you looked at me, you'll understand what you took from us. He didn't reply. The call ended. I signed the papers the next day, not because I agreed, but because holding on was hurting Thomas. We received a small amount of money, not enough to rebuild a life, just enough to survive. We moved to a smaller room in a different home, quieter, cheaper, farther away. Thomas's health continued to decline. Some mornings he didn't recognize where he was. Some nights he whispered Daniel's name in his sleep. Daniel never visited, never asked. The baby was born. We found out through a social media post. A picture of Daniel smiling, Claire holding the baby, our old house in the background, repainted, redesigned, unrecognizable. I stared at that image for a long time, and that's when I realized something painful but freeing. They had taken everything from us, except our dignity. I held Thomas's hand that night and promised him something. No matter how this ends, I whispered, we won't disappear quietly, because some truths demand to be spoken, even if it takes years. I believed my story would fade away in silence until one unexpected moment gave me a chance to speak again and be heard. The chance came on an ordinary afternoon. No warning, no preparation. A woman from the assisted living home stopped me in the hallway. She was younger than me, maybe in her 50s, kind eyes, gentle voice. "I hear you tell stories sometimes," she said. "You should come to our family night. People talk. It helps." I almost said no, but something inside me said it was time. That evening, families gathered in the common room. Sons, daughters, grandchildren. Laughter echoed softly, mixed with the clinking of cups and the hum of old memories. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. I didn't plan a speech. I just told the truth. I spoke about a home built with love, about a son raised with care, about how easily gratitude can be replaced by convenience. I didn't name Daniel. I didn't need to. As I spoke, I noticed heads lowering, hands tightening. A few people wiped their eyes. One man stood up and left the room quietly. When I finished, there was silence, then applause. Not loud, not cheerful, respectful. After that night, people started sitting with me, asking questions, sharing their own stories, stories of being forgotten, of being replaced, of becoming invisible. I realized my pain wasn't unique, and that gave it purpose. A few weeks later, Thomas passed away in his sleep, peacefully. I held his hand until it went still. I whispered that he was loved, that he was enough, that none of this was his fault. Daniel didn't come to the funeral. He sent flowers. No note, just flowers. I stood beside Thomas's grave alone and felt a grief so deep it was almost calm, like the ocean after a storm, vast, quiet, endless. After the funeral, something strange happened. Daniel called. His voice sounded different, uncertain. "I heard about Dad," he said. I thanked him. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Claire thinks maybe we should talk." I closed my eyes. "About what?" I asked. "About the past," he said. "About moving on." Moving on. I thought of Thomas's hands, the porch swing, the wedding hall, the silence. "I'm not angry," I said, but I won't pretend. Another pause. He will call you, he said. They didn't, but that was okay, because for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting anymore. I had found something stronger than hope, acceptance, and acceptance changes everything. I thought acceptance was the end of my journey until one final encounter forced my son to face the truth in a way he never expected. The final encounter happened when I least expected it. It was a Sunday morning. I was sitting near the window in the common room, watching sunlight fall across the floor. I had learned to enjoy small things: warmth, stillness, the sound of birds outside. Peace had become simple. Then I saw him. Daniel stood at the doorway. He looked older, tired. His shoulders were tense, like he was bracing for something heavy. Claire wasn't with him. For a moment, I didn't move. Neither did he. Then he walked toward me slowly, like a child approaching someone he wasn't sure would forgive him. "Mom," he said. I nodded. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. "Sit," I said gently. He sat across from me, hands clasped, eyes darting around the room. "I didn't know where else to find you. Claire's parents are helping with the baby, and things have been stressful." I waited. Silence stretched between us. He continued, "I keep thinking about Daniel, about the wedding, about everything." I folded my hands in my lap. Thinking is good. It means something still hurts. He looked up at me, surprised. "I came to say, I'm sorry," he said quickly, "for how things went." Not for what he did, for how things went. I didn't correct him. Instead, I asked one question. "Do you remember the night you told us to leave the house?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." "Do you remember what your father said after you left?" I asked. He shook his head. I said, "At least he found someone who loves him." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "He didn't know," he whispered. "That's the problem," I said softly. "You didn't want to know." He covered his face with his hands. "I was trying to build a life. I didn't think—" "I know," I interrupted gently. "You didn't think love could be taken for granted." I leaned forward slightly. "You wanted peace, so you gave away your parents to get it." The words hung in the air. He cried then, quietly, not loudly, the kind of crying that comes when excuses run out. "I don't expect anything from you. Not visits, not apologies, not promises." He looked at me, confused. "But I want you to remember this. One day, your child will grow up, and when they choose someone over you, you'll remember this moment." He nodded, unable to speak. "I loved you completely," I said. "That never changed. But love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be erased." I stood up. "I forgive you," I said, "but I won't come back." His face collapsed. "He understands," he whispered. And for the first time, I believed him. I thought forgiveness would finally bring closure. until the quiet consequences of my son's choices began to unfold one by one. After that day, Daniel never visited again, but life somehow continued. I found comfort in the small routines, making tea, walking down the hallway, talking to the other residents, even reading letters I never sent. I realized that the emptiness left by his absence could be filled, not with him, but with dignity, with memories, and with the quiet love that remained in my heart. The world outside moved on. Daniel celebrated his child's birthdays. Claire shared photos on social media showing a home full of joy, laughter, and new memories. Our old house, repainted and unfamiliar, was alive with their version of happiness. And yet, I realized, happiness cannot erase what was taken. I walked past a mirror one morning and stopped. I barely recognized myself. The woman looking back had grown older, yes, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes, a resilience forged in betrayal, loss, and silence. I had survived what I once thought would destroy me. And then I began writing. Letters, memories, stories, small pieces of life that could not be stolen. I wrote to friends, neighbors, and even kept some for myself. I wrote about Thomas, about Daniel, about our home. I wrote about love that had been misused but never broken. Writing became my sanctuary. It was my way of reclaiming what had been stripped from me, my voice. Months later, I received an unexpected visitor, a young woman from the assisted living home. She handed me a letter, slightly crumpled, from a stranger. She said, "You don't know me, but I watched your story unfold. I wanted you to have this." It was from someone who had read about us online, a distant relative who had followed the news of Daniel's social media posts. They didn't offer comfort, but they validated one thing: our story mattered. And that realization changed everything. I realized that even though Daniel had tried to erase us, our life, our struggles, our love, they couldn't erase the truth. And truth, once lived, cannot be undone. I started speaking more openly at gatherings, at small events, even on phone calls with other residents' families. I shared lessons of resilience, of dignity, and of holding one's ground even when the world turns against you. Slowly, people listened. They respected me. They recognized that I had endured what few could even imagine. And somewhere deep inside, I felt peace. Not because Daniel had returned, not because our house could be ours again, but because I had found my voice. A voice they could not silence. I had learned to survive without my son, but what happened next would test my strength in ways I never imagined. Years passed. Daniel's life went on, and so did mine, in very different ways. I watched him from a distance, through social media, through occasional news from mutual relatives. I saw his child grow. I saw birthdays, graduations, and celebrations, and I understood, painfully, that I would never be part of those moments, not fully, not openly. But I no longer felt anger, not in the way it once consumed me. Anger, I realized, is a fire that burns the holder first. I had been burned, yes, but I had survived. And survival, I learned, brings a strange kind of clarity. One morning, I walked in the garden of the assisted living home. Snow was melting. The first signs of spring were appearing. Tiny buds, stubbornly bright against gray earth. I remembered the roses we planted in our old home, how I nurtured them as a young mother, how they bloomed every year without fail. And in that moment, I understood life, even when cruel, continues. Even after betrayal, loss, and humiliation, it still grows. I spoke to the residents sitting nearby. Life, I told them, doesn't end when people betray you. Life continues because you're still here. And while you're still here, you have a voice. Don't let anyone silence it." Some nodded, some held my hand, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet strength that wasn't tied to anyone else. Not my son, not Claire, not the house that was taken. This strength belonged to me. Daniel never reached out again. He never apologized beyond that one fleeting attempt. But I had no need for it. I had peace. And then, one afternoon, something remarkable happened. A young woman, a neighbor's daughter, came up to me with tears in her eyes. She said, "I've been struggling with my own family, and your story, your strength, it's the only thing that's kept me going." I realized then that even if Daniel had erased our place in his life, our story, our love, our struggle, our dignity could inspire others, that even in pain there can be purpose. I smiled, slowly, not a full smile, not a triumphant one, but a smile that carried years of endurance, grief, and understanding. Because I had been silenced. I had been erased. I had been pushed out of everything I loved. And yet, here I was, alive, strong, and finally truly heard. Rehook. End of part 9. I thought the story ended with loss and betrayal, but what happened next would finally give me the peace and justice I had silently yearned for all those years. Years had passed, and I had learned to live without my son. But life, as it often does, has a way of revealing truths when you least expect them. One afternoon, I received a call from a woman named Emily. She explained that she was Daniel's cousin, someone he had grown up with, but who had been kept distant from him over the years. She said, "I know what he did, and I think it's time you hear the truth." We met at a quiet cafe near my assisted living home. Emily handed me a folder. Inside were emails, messages, and letters Daniel had never wanted me to see. It was clear Claire had manipulated him from the start. She had convinced him that his parents were inconvenient, controlling, even dangerous to their future together. Daniel had been torn, confused, young, desperate to please Claire. The realization hit me like ice. Daniel hadn't been cruel because he hated us. He had been trapped in someone else's vision of life, so focused on pleasing Claire that he lost himself along the way. I felt sorrow, but not relief, not fully, because while understanding the why gave insight, it didn't erase the years of humiliation, the empty house, the loneliness, the grief of losing Thomas. But then Emily said something that changed me. "Mom," she said, "he still loves you. You just have to hear it from him, without anyone controlling him." A week later, Daniel came, alone, hesitant, vulnerable. I invited him to sit. He avoided my eyes at first. "I should have never done what I did," he said. "I let someone else decide how I treated my parents. I was wrong. I've lived with that guilt every day." He paused, and I saw the boy I once held in my arms, the boy who trusted me, who loved me, who had once been my world. He continued, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know the truth, and that I love you." I reached for his hand. My voice was calm, steady. "I know, Daniel, and I forgive you," I said, not because it erases the pain, but because holding on to it would only hurt us more. Life is too short for bitterness. Tears streamed down his face. Mine did too. But these were different tears, tears of relief, closure, and connection finally restored. That day, Daniel and I didn't fix the past. We didn't bring back the house. We didn't undo the years of neglect. But we found something far more powerful: understanding, love tempered by honesty, honesty tempered by forgiveness. I finally felt peace. And as we sat together, talking quietly, I realized the truth that had taken decades to learn. Sometimes the family you lose isn't gone forever. Sometimes love survives even betrayal. And sometimes silence can finally become a voice. I left the cafe that day lighter than I had felt in years. The wind carried the scent of spring, warm and real. And for the first time, I understood that the life I had survived, the pain, the heartbreak, the exile, had made me stronger than I could possibly imagined. Even when life feels cruel, even when those we love turn away, our story, our dignity, and our courage remain forever ours. I was thrown out, humiliated, and nearly erased, but in the end, I found my voice, my peace, and a love that could never be stolen. And that is a strength no one can take away.